and welcome to Seatrade Cruise Talks. Today we are bringing you the Hospitality XFactor, new psychometrics for sourcing service superstars. So here to explore what a promising service superstar looks like is Dr. James Houran, Managing Director of AETHOS Consulting Group and a 25-year veteran in applied psychological research. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. There's a live Q&A to the right of your screen. So if you have any questions, please jot them here and we'll put these to Jim right at the very end. Similarly, if you have any technical issues, there's a chat box on the left. So drop us a message here and we'll come back to you as quickly as we can. So finally, a recording of this session will be sent to everyone who has signed up to watch, and that will be with you 24 hours after this session ends. Some key takeaways will also be sent to you within the next few days, so keep a lookout for those. And without any further ado then, it is over to you, Dr. Jim.
Thank you very much. I wish we could all do this in person, but I appreciate you spending time with me today to talk about psychometrics. Now, normally people think psychometrics, we're going to get nerdy and technical. Well, we won't get technical, but we might get a little nerdy, but just bear with me because I want to keep this very high level today, very applied. We've been doing exciting research over the last 3 years at AETHOS on what makes a service superstar. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. It's all culminated into a very interesting algorithm that people will eventually be able to have on their phones. But until that is released, we're going to give you some special insights on how you can use our learnings right now to enhance your bench strength that you have, as well as a model to help training and developing people that you want to take to the next level. Now, I have to say that the research that we went to build this algorithm, these new psychometric insights, they're not just limited to cruise. Now, I'm not just saying this to suck up. Cruise is my favorite part of the service hospitality industry. I have a personal admiration. I just love the people that are involved in cruise. But the business that we have, AETHOS Consulting Group, we serve all the sectors. So we're devoted to lodging, restaurants, casino, gaming, obviously cruise, private clubs, and even travel and other aspects of the tech industry. But what I love about the cruise space is that you have this epicenter. You are at the crossroads of all of those things, which makes you unique. More than any other business in the service hospitality industry that I've seen, cruise is the one that has to be the most dynamic, the most resourceful, because you're trying to do so much at the same time. And you're a floating city, so you're doing it on the move. But the research that we've conducted to share the insights today were not just gathered from cruise. We went across the entire spectrum of the service hospitality industry. So it's good that you have that kind of background and context. And also you might be wondering, well, who's this guy? Why should we listen to Dr. Jim? Well, let me tell you, I'm not here to sell you any books or tapes or anything like that. I am like you. There's half of me that's a practitioner. I want to share what works in the real world to make businesses better. So I'm very outcomes oriented. But there's another half of me, that's the academic. That's the Ph.D. in me. So I care about giving you accurate information, and I also want to be the person that explores and gathers that firsthand. I don't want to just pass along what I've heard from other people. So I'm an explorer, I'm a practitioner. So you can trust that what I'm going to tell you today is not just opinion. It's based on good, solid research that has a practical application. So first off, you probably are feeling this pain point. You probably felt it pre-COVID. You're certainly feeling it now, and you'll feel a little bit afterwards. And that is the cost of bad hires. We've all experienced it, and they are massive. There's a strong business case to be made for why you want to prevent bad hires. Look at it just from a financial standpoint. Even the cost of a low-level individual, the cost of a failed hire at the entry line level can be twice that person's annual compensation. And when you're talking about mid-managers or even senior level executives, the cost of a bad hire can be 6 times that person's salary. And the side effects also aren't just limited to the pain points of finances. You're talking about the time lost in having to rehire, lost productivity, managers' time lost interviewing people, training, onboarding, orientation, as well as the optics of it all, only undermines employee engagement and dedication, and sometimes can lead to increased turnover. And so why does all this happen? Why are bad hires such a problem? Again, pre-COVID, now, and after. Well, there's 4 general reasons why people get into this quicksand of bad hiring. The first is there's always been a pressure to fill roles quickly. And in psychology, we have this heuristic. There's this principle known as the speed-accuracy trade-off. You can do something fast or you can do it accurate, but usually you don't get both at the same time. So you have to choose. What do you want? Well, in today's world of just instant gratification, no one wants to make that choice. So there's always a pressure to perform, and part of that is making hiring decisions as quickly as possible. What undermines, therefore, moving quick and fast and accurate is the fact that when you're dealing with candidates, either with pre-screening tests or behavioral interviews, candidates usually don't give you fully accurate information. In fact, we did a study at Ethos a few years ago looking at LinkedIn profiles and the impressions that HR and hiring managers got from those profiles and what they expected to see in terms of cultural fit and technical competency of a candidate in person. Well, when they then met that person face to face, they found that there was often a large disconnect. In fact, oftentimes there was a 50% disconnect between what they were expecting to see from a LinkedIn profile versus what they got in person. And you see those similar metrics also in online dating. So it's important to move accurately, carefully, not just quickly. And part of it is making sure that you're gathering accurate information from candidates. But also, a lot of companies, for whatever reason, may not do a very effective job at all of the aspects of due diligence. In fact, due diligence isn't just one thing. At Ethos, we like to think of it as a 3-legged stool. That's what makes the stool stable. You certainly start with a standardized assessment. That gathers some impartial objective feedback, some indication of a person's attributes and potential. But then you want to cross-check that with a structured behavioral interview and, whenever possible, proper reference checking. You put those 3 pieces of information together and you typically have the most accurate mosaic of a candidate. But again, with the pressure to move fastly to fill roles, oftentimes you're not going to do all 3 of those aspects. And critical to that is assessing skills, actual traits, what people can actually do, not just their personality profiles. In fact, a lot of professionals, many of you probably here today, leverage what is free and is online, known as the ONET database. ONET. Anyone can access it, and it's sponsored by the government, and what makes it very valuable is it looks at job descriptions in different industries, and it looks at the requirements, the competency profiles for those jobs. You're not going to find personality traits there. You're going to find skill sets and knowledge areas. Those are the things that best predict how a person will perform in the workplace. Yet, in that pressure to hire quickly, oftentimes, even if you do an interview, even if you do try to reference check, it's hard to corroborate a person's skill sets. And typically, you're not going to do that with a line level or entry level role. You do that for mid-managers and senior level executives. So all of these pressures are working against you to be fit, fast, efficient in hiring, but also accurate. Now, the fix that most of us were taught, we learned it either in school or when we first started in HR, was this mantra. Maybe some of you live by it today, that if you want to fix hiring, all you got to do is focus on hiring for attitude and then train for skill afterwards. Hire for attitude, train for skill. We've all heard it. Many of us probably practice it. And it sounds reasonable on its face, but there are some problems with this particular approach, this formula. First, no one knows what attitude means. There is no general consensus on what you mean when you say someone has the attitude, especially in a measurable or what I would call psychometric sense. And psychometrics are just the science of how you measure psychological traits, whether that's intelligence testing, personality traits, or other variables that speak to temperament or abilities. So there is no consistent psychometric model yet for what defines the right attitude. A lot of people If you're interviewing the candidate, what they're going to latch onto in terms of attitude is how much they like that person. This is true especially of hiring managers that have no formal training like HR professionals do on how you conduct a structured behavioral interview. Instead, just like speed dating, hiring managers often look for, do I like this person? Are they similar to me? Because birds of a feather flock together. So if a person seems likable, approachable, relatable to me, they got the job. And usually, just like speed dating, you can get a sense of whether you like a person if you feel you can work with that individual within the first 30 seconds. But in no way does that get at what a person can do, their skill sets, which are critical in determining whether someone's going to be a technical fit and also a cultural fit. A lot of people in HR use assessments that are specifically grounded in personality theory. That comes from the idea that what we mean by attitude is the right personality profile. And usually we think of that as an extroverted character, especially in the service hospitality industry, where people are the product, not just the food or the experience, but people are a product as well. So how a person comes across that brand ambassadorship is a key component. And people have often used a lot of well-known assessments for the last 30, 40, 50 years to measure certain personality traits like introversion and extroversion. You're probably familiar with the Big Five model of personality, the degree to which a person is open and conscientious and extroverted, they're agreeable, or do they have some good stability in their mood. Other people use the Myers-Briggs, famous for orientations to new companies to try to get a sense of what your style is and your approach and how does that work or how does that rub against the styles of other people. And of course, there's other assessments that are more modern, like predictive index, for example, Hogan assessments. So there are a wide variety of choices, but the ones that are grounded in personality theory always have the same issue, and that is personality is an inconsistent predictor of workplace performance. Now, that may strike some people as odd, like, wait, what are you saying, Jim? Personality plays no role in workplace performance at all? Well, obviously you can never take personality completely out of the equation. But think about this. You know extroverts and you know introverts, so do I. And guess what? They can both ride a bike and tie their shoes. All right, so a person's personality style does not consistently predict what they do in the environment of a professional setting. Now, it might be different in the personal setting, but not in the professional setting, where people are motivated, they're operating, they're doing things in large part how they're trained to do, not how they would personally prefer to do them. You're operating by a set of standards, SOPs, culture, mission, values. Oftentimes people share those values. That's why they stay at companies for so long. But the way we go about our work in a professional setting is in some ways a performance. It's not just how you normally are. We have to abide by rules. So introversion, extroversion, it won't tell you, can someone tie their shoe or ride a bike, okay? But it can tell you, personality traits can tell you, well, how fast do they ride their bike? What color shoe would they buy? And do they tie it in a nice little fancy bow, or are they very pragmatic? So personality has a place, but it's a small part of a broader mosaic. And we need to get at that broader mosaic. So if you're only screening and selecting people based on personality traits, you are not selecting on those variables that best predict what a person can actually do in the workplace. Again, you will not see personality traits in large part on the ONET database that gives you competency profiles for different roles. You're looking at skill sets and knowledge areas. And these things can and do change over time as people learn and mature and get development and coaching and training. So personality traits by definition are stagnant. They're stable. They're steady for about a 45-year period starting in early adolescence. And minus some sort of brain injury or brain disease, how you are in early adolescence is how you're going to be in your general interpersonal style in personal settings for a good part of your life. So you can't train, you can't coach someone out of personality issues. At best, all you can do is train them to cover them up. But we're looking at skill sets and knowledge areas that best predict what a person can actually do. And that is what we were focused on at Ethos in a 3-year study to understand what makes someone great. What is the psychometric definition of this hire for attitude? What is that attitude? We think we have an answer. I can tell you first what the answer isn't. We want to hire for talent, and talent does not mean personality traits. Aside from it being an inconsistent predictor of workplace performance, you also need to understand if you're touching on people's internal characteristics, those immutable traits and tendencies and motivations, you're also skating a thin line on adverse impact and bias issues. Those tread on issues where people can claim bias because it's not my fault. Some personality traits even are on that edge of mental health or wellness issues. So if you try to discipline or not select someone for a job based on personality, you are potentially opening yourself up to some legal risk. But instead, not just for optics or for legalities, there's a better way, and that is equating talent. Hiring for talent means, the attitude means contextual performance. Now, I promised you at the beginning I wasn't going to get too technical. Nerdy, yes, that's just me, but not too technical. I'm going to break that promise a little bit here because contextual performance is academic jargon. It's academic jargon that's about 20 years old, but it really describes the ultimate transferable skill set. Let me tell you what it's about. Contextual behavior is what you wish you could clone in everybody. It was what you wish you could copy and paste in people. You know it when you see it, because it's a set of attitudes and behaviors that are applicable to any job, any company, any industry. It has more to do with the person's potential to be action-oriented, results-driven. And that means that they go above and beyond in any circumstance and setting to do what it takes to get a goal met. These are the people that are, you would think, classically engaged. They're passionate. They're also personally dedicated to do what it takes to get something done because it's a reflection on them, not just on the employer. So these are people that are in it to win it, so to speak. And in the course of academic research, that notion of contextual performance was defined by 3 general characteristics. These probably make sense to you. They make sense to me. The first has to do with interpersonal support. In other words, a person's propensity to go and just, without even being asked, to proactively help and support others. It's also one of the hallmarks of servant leadership, where a leader is not just concerned with his or her own success, but one of the metrics of am I a good leader is my ability to make other people successful, my ability to groom future leaders. That kind of plays into this as well. That notion that you're not just here to do your work, you're here to support success across a platform or an enterprise. Very important. On top of that is this notion of organizational support, where instead of now focusing on the individual relationships and alliances, you're now focused on doing what's best for the company, what's best that drives value for the organization. And that means following the rules and showing loyalty, being dedicated, staying with it even if it's difficult. And then finally, this notion of conscientiousness. Not only are you trying to help others, and not only are you trying to follow rules and being dedicated to the platform over time, but you're so dedicated, you're willing to take time to avoid the speed accuracy trade-off. Instead of just trying to get your work done fast, you're trying to work smart, not just work hard. And people like that are very conscientious. By that, I mean they're persistent, they're dedicated, they've got grit and resilience. They pay attention to what needs to be done, the details matter, as does their approach to making that goal happen. So it's not just about getting the result, but how you get the result also matters. So these people have a tendency to be cooperative, they are dedicated over time, and they're highly conscientious about the work that they're doing, so it's high quality, but they're also focused on making sure they stay with it until a goal is met. Strong perseverance. Now that model is pretty good, and it makes sense probably to a lot of people, but we found that it's incomplete. We wanted to understand if that model held true today, because the work environment of today is quite different than 20, 25 years ago, when that notion of contextual performance was just getting started. So we spent a lot of time, almost 3 years, on a multi-phase research study to understand what is that attitude that we should be hiring for. What is that, as we call it, the X factor? You know it when you see it, these people that are service superstars, and you wish you could copy and paste, copy and paste. Well, we spent first a lot of time in the field, talking to HR professionals, as well as hiring managers, as well as leaders of companies, to understand how they saw the X factor. Without trying to lead them on with past theories or our own ideas, we just listened. We asked them to describe the attitudes, behaviors, the temperament, the motivations, the styles of people that they would say have the hospitality X factor. And we listened. And then we realized after about a year of just listening to people and gathering that intel from different points of view, from people that were front of house, back of house, people up and down the org chart from different industries. We learned that there were actually a set of characteristics that everybody was touching on. Oh, they used different names, different terms for them, but there were 4 specific themes that emerged from those interviews. And we called it the chat model, because when you think of screening and selecting someone, you think of interviewing them. We want you to think about having a chat with a person. An easy mnemonic that you can keep in mind these 4 critical areas of performance. It draws on what happened 20 years ago, but it takes it a little bit further. And here's what we learned. That when people talk about the X factor, the attitude that they really want to hire for, they're really talking about 4 themes. These are just in the order of chat, so it's a nice, easy to remember mnemonic. But as we'll see, there's different hierarchies to these different areas. But the C in chat stands for conscientiousness. Now, we heard about that before. That is a person's ability to pay attention to the quality of their work, and also staying very grounded and persevering to achieve an outcome. So it's a focus on details, it's a focus on quality of outcomes, and also the dedication, resilience, and grit necessary to reach those outcomes. The H in chat stands for hospitable. This is what you all know as emotional intelligence, empathy. This is where a person is not just giving service because they're told to, or that they're getting judged because there's a mystery shopper, or they're going to be looking on some other kind of net promoter score or other kinds of surveys. But a person is driven to give good service proactively because they have empathy for the guest, for the customer. They want to please that person. That's the goal. They want, if anything, to over-deliver on expectations. So it's not because they're required to. It's not because there's these external forces beating down on them and they're being watched, so they have to do a good job. No, people that are hospitable have a service gene where they want to make people happy. That is driven from the inside. So instead of an external force or pressure, the pressure comes from inside them. It's an internal force. So these are the people you don't have to light a fire under. They already have a fire lit inside themselves, pokey as that might sound. Now, do not be tempted to think that only extroverts can have the service gene, that those are the people that can connect and build relationships and try to please. Not at all. In fact, when people see me in a public speaking environment, they sometimes describe me as kind of high energy, kind of nerdy, but they get a sense that they can tell I like what I do. I like talking to people about our industry and great tactics to improve performance at the individual and the team level and the organizational levels. But if you saw my Myers-Briggs, you would be shocked. I am not an extrovert. I'm an introvert. I am severely shy. If I go to a party, it's only because I know somebody there, and I'm going to stick to those people that I know and I can talk with. I'm not going to go around and mingle. That's not how I'm hardwired. But in a professional setting, I can be quite different. I can be very outgoing. Hopefully I can be engaging. I pay attention to other people because I care about bringing value to them. That's the essence of EQ, of being hospitable, empathy-driven service. The A in chat stands for adaptable. And in no environment do we see the need for being adaptable, flexible, and nimble than in this COVID area, where it's upended process. And so everyone talks about getting used to the new normal. Well, until there's a new normal, you have to deal with chaos. Now, in the service hospitality industry, we're used to that. We're used to environments that are ever changing, that are dynamic, where you're constantly having to juggle plates. And it's my belief that nowhere does that get more intense, and nowhere are the stakes higher than in cruise. That's why I admire you all so much. What you have to do with the restrictions that you're under is nothing short of miraculous. So that takes a lot of not just perseverance, but natural adaptability. Now, When I say adaptability, I'm talking about a person that can handle situations or scenarios that we term VUCA. Actually, it's not my term, it's the military's term. So VUCA and UFO have something in common. They're both military terms. Unidentified flying object is a military term, and so is VUCA. And what VUCA stands for is situations that involve volatility, uncertainty, complexity, or require adaptability. So it takes a special person to be nimble and adaptable. That also means being able to draw on process and precedent when it makes sense, but also being resourceful and innovative when what you learned before doesn't apply to what you're facing now. So adaptability, critical, not just during this time, but just in the business of being in the service hospitality industry. And finally, the T in chat stands for trainability. In other words, a person has to have a certain level of, well, raw intelligence to be able to adapt, to cope, to learn new information, and then to apply it in real time. So people can learn to be more trainable, believe it or not. You can up your IQ in certain ways if you flex certain parts of your brain, your mind, that muscle. But to be trainable means a person is also humble, to realize that, yeah, they might have a raw set of not just intelligence, but best practices. They've learned from their experience and their professional maturity of certain things work, other things don't. But with intelligence comes humility, where a person realizes, I don't know it all. I sometimes have to leverage the knowledge, the experience of other people. So someone that's trainable is not just smart, they're also humble. They're also the kind of person that is eager to learn new information and apply it to new settings. So they're a sponge, and they see learnings everywhere. They don't have to just go online to the Khan Academy. They see every person in every situation as an opportunity to learn something new or to practice a new skill. So you put all of those things together, and that created for us the initial idea, the hypothesis that what people mean by the X factor, what they really mean by when they say hire for attitude is you hire against the chat model, someone that at the same time is conscientious, hospitable, adaptable, and trainable. Now, this is not just opinion. We also now put this idea to the test in a pretty serious way as well. And this is where I actually have to thank everyone. There's probably a lot of people that are listening today that assisted us in our work in the field to validate this model, the chat model, as the psychometric description of what it means to have the X factor. That those are the people that are the service superstars. And I also have to thank Cornell University. We've been a partner with Cornell for many years, and we work very well with them on different research projects. They helped us in a field validation on the chat model. And that field validation was actually in a couple of phases. And we leveraged artificial intelligence to get at an algorithm on the nuances and complexities that just we couldn't see on paper, but that the real intense data analysis could extract for us and see patterns and reveal indicators that maybe were not obvious before. And as it turned out, that was a good approach to take. So what we did with our field validation, first off, was we took the chat model, the CHAT, and we then tried to drill down on what specifically went under each one of those 4 issues. What specific attitudes, knowledge areas, skill sets really were those 4 broad buckets describing? That came also from those interviews I described with you later. And through that field research, we developed a 20-item scorecard, a list of 20 different attitudes, knowledge areas, and behaviors that really defined the scope of what it means to have the chat profile. And we found out, though, that not only did we have this set, but that set of items actually formed a scale. It made a construct. Those 4 things, the chat model, are not 4 separate issues. Those are 4 aspects of one single issue. There's just one concept. There's one construct, but it has 4 different aspects to it. Those are the 4 chat aspects. But don't think of these as 4 disconnected issues. No, these 4 things roll up to a larger trait that we call the X factor. So not only do we have a model that describes qualitatively what the X factor looks like, but we also have now a way to measure it. And we can tell when someone is low, medium, or high on that scale of the X factor. Now I'm going to show you what those 20 items are, and then I'll show you a way that we condense those 20 items into a very simple way of screening and selecting people. But first, we had to make sure that those 20 items were robust, that psychometrically that they work. And we found out that, well, we were on the right track, but we also were a little bit wrong. You see, we found out that 7 of those 20 items did not work the way that we thought. We thought they were measuring the chat model. We found out actually they were measuring aspects of bias. They were measuring things that were superfluous to the actual performance model that we had. Instead, they were measuring demographic factors like a person's age or their gender. So those are items that we have to get rid of, because if we try to screen or select on those, we're opening ourselves up for legal risk, as well as an inaccurate outcome, because it's not measuring the chat model, it's measuring an artifact. But I first want to show you those 20 items. Have a look. What you're going to see here on the left-hand side is the specific KPI. So we're putting all of them together, all 20. They're not separated out by the chat variables because they all form one single construct that we're calling the X factor. That's a simple way of saying contextual performance. So you're going to see all 20 items. Take a moment and read through them. Now, next in the middle, you're going to see a column that says Logit. Well, what that Logit means, now this is where it gets technical. Where on that scale of the X factor does that particular issue lay? So the Logit value, that number, really works the same way as you would think of as a millimeter, a centimeter, or an inch. It tells you, does that issue lie at the low end of the scale, at the medium, or at the high end? The same way that basic arithmetic is at the low end of mathematics, multiplication tables are towards the middle, differential calculus is at the end. All of it is the family of math, but they represent different levels of proficiency or intensity of a particular trait. So not that you're going to need to know those Logit values, but I wanted you to see that just to be academically correct here. But now try to guess. I said again, there were 7 items that we have to throw out of these 20 because there are 7 items that do not measure the chat model. So get in your head the predictions and let's see if you're right. The first item about does someone just abide by the clothing, the standards of a brand presence in an organization. We found out that that just didn't work, not at all. It statistically didn't even fit the model, we throw it out. Then we found out that certain issues, if you have people grade someone's performance, rate their performance like a performance review or an appraisal, that people that were young or old got either higher or lower scores just because of their age. So people that are, for example, that are older, more mature in their careers, those are people that would just by default tend to get a higher grade on following company rules or procedures. Young people less so. And that actually might make some sense. But then we also find that those same kinds of biases, when you look at a person's behavior and you rate, do they have it or do they not, and to what extent? Well, we found that also you can get some discrepancies, some bias, depending on whether the rater is looking at a man versus a woman in that role. So we have to get rid of those issues as well. So it's not always easy to tell by looking just at an item whether something is biased or not, whether it will give you an inaccurate result, whether it will bring you some legal trouble. But that's why we use very advanced statistics known as item response theory. And if you're ever bored, if you can't sleep one night, go to Wikipedia, type in item response theory and read about it. And you'll be asleep in about 4 minutes. It's very technical, very nerdy. You don't need to know about it, except that it is the gold standard in statistics. In real world assessments like the GRE or the MCAT or the LSAT, the assessments that determine real aspects of a person's life, the results matter, and people can sue over the results. That's where they use this kind of mathematics. Those other things that I mentioned earlier in the presentation about personality theory and the kinds of tests like the Myers-Briggs and the Big Five, those tend to be measured with something known as classical test theory. And my goodness, even the name sounds old, classical test theory. We've known it's been outdated since 1960, and we've also known that it cannot help detect these hidden biases. So we're using a legally defensible mathematic to get at a better understanding of the X factor. So there are 7 items that disappear, but there's 13 remain, 13 good items. Now, instead of just asking a person about, well, do you have this trait? Do you have this ability? Is this how you go about your work? You would never want to lead the witness. So we wanted to try to develop a very simple, easy, but very clever way of measuring these 13 things at the same time, but in a way that a person is not even aware that you're measuring them. But to be able to do that, to have that kind of an application, that kind of actual assessment, you've got to do some further research. And so we did. First off, we condensed those 13 items into a wanted poster. In other words, we turned those 13 items on the scorecard into a word cloud in the shape of a person. So instead of reading through these long, descriptive text, you're getting a visual sense of what you're really looking for in a person that's a service superstar. Now notice it's a word cloud. So items that are bigger, the words that are bigger, they count more. They have greater weight in the equation than the words that are smaller. However, you need all 13 in order to make a good calculation. So you need the entire recipe, but the ingredients, the amount of each ingredient can change. Sometimes you want a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. But you're looking at the formula in a visual way for the X factor. Now we wanted to create a way to measure against this in a way that a person can't even game. Well, the problem with a lot of those tests, like I said, is candidates will try to tell you what you want to hear. They're not always forthcoming with describing their background and their abilities. So you can't trust them also to fill out a scorecard. Even if they were taking it and being sincere, they have internal biases that they will just tend to give the answer that they think you want to hear versus what's accurate. We wanted to flip that script. We wanted to measure these things in a way that, one, they weren't even aware of, and two, they couldn't game. And so to do that, we went to different companies in the field around the world. And thanks to everyone on the call today that participated in that first step of a field validation. We went to that company and we said, we want you to give us 3 groups of people. And you're going to give those 3 groups of people based on you looking at our wanted poster. You see, we want you to find people that clearly match the wanted poster. We're going to call those people high in the X factor. They have it. You know it. You don't have to debate it. You probably know it when you see it. Likewise, you might have people that, well, they're somewhat there. They have several of them, but not all of them. I certainly wouldn't want to fire the person, but they're certainly not a service superstar yet. Well, we want those people too. Get me a large group of those people. We're going to call them the medium X factor. And then the people that just do not match this profile. Those are the low X factor individuals. And these companies, without us knowing, put together these 3 groups of individuals. We had hundreds of them. And what we did is we also had them go through, these people in these 3 groups, go through a simple little exercise, a little game that we devised to try to figure out if we could develop an algorithm that not only predicted these 13 things really well, but also predicted what level that a person is at. So in other words, we were interested in developing an algorithm that predicted whether someone was low, medium, or high on this X factor, as defined by that word cloud. And so those people went through a simple little exercise that we devised, and that will soon be actually a commercial application. But it's a simple little exercise. It feels like a game where you're presented with 2 scenarios, 2 pictures. And all you have to do is select which one you feel most comfortable with, which one resonates with you. And as soon as you make a selection, 2 different ones come up. And as you go through this little exercise, you either look at 2 entirely new scenarios side by side, or sometimes it brings back an old one that you already looked at. But either way, all you're doing is selecting between 2 scenarios. And by the way, those are 2 scenarios that look equally good or equally bad. So it's not obvious which one you're supposed to select. So we try to make it game proof. So people went through that. And by the way, it was a very simple exercise. It took 4 minutes. So this wasn't a very long, detailed psychometric assessment that people are spending hours on. It's a 4-minute little game. And indeed, this is where now the AI comes into play, the machine learning, the artificial intelligence. You take all that big sample of people and you divide them randomly into 2 groups. And we look to see if we can extract an algorithm that predicts low, medium, and high levels of the X factor. And indeed, we found one. But you don't just believe it, you then test it on the second group. It seemed to work on the first. We have an algorithm that described could predict low, medium, and high levels of the X factor in just one group, but did it also replicate? Can it generalize to the second group? And indeed it did. In fact, it worked so well that we now wanted to put it back into the field in an exercise of predictive validity. Meaning now I wanted to go to organizations and repeat that same general process. Have them find me groups of low, medium, and high people, but without me knowing who they are, I want to give them our little test. And I'll tell you whether we would have categorized them low, medium, or high, and we'll ask them to compare that to their own rating. They got together little subcommittees. And so between HR and hiring managers, they ahead of time selected 3 groups of people as low, medium, and high on the X factor. Again, using our word cloud, our wanted poster as the guide. Then we independently came back, gave each of those individuals across the 3 groups that we had no idea which group they were in, we gave them our little 4-minute test. And then we came back with our own predictions. It weren't really our predictions, the algorithm made an instant classification. So as soon as they were done with the assessment, they received, well, you know it very simply as the green light, yellow light, red light approach. Do they seem to have what it takes to match the profile of the X factor? That would be green. Do they seem to have a good number of the components, but still room for growth? That would be the yellow. Or do they just not match the profile at all? That would be the red. So now we have a stoplight approach and a 4-minute little exercise that we felt could predict the X factor quickly, but also accurately for line level, entry level roles, front, back of house, regardless of what industry you're in. So how predictive was it? How well did our algorithm developed with AI predict the independent and unknown to us categories of the 3 groups? 82%. 82%. In some cases, for example, low X factor, we actually could get that up to 89%. We could tell you that with 89% accuracy, who was definitely low on the X factor. Also on the high X factor, we also got quite high, 85%. Where the judgment gets a little hazier, as you might expect, is when people are on the fence. They have some of them, but not all. But do they have the right amount that gives us confidence they can learn and grow and become a service superstar? Those would be the yellows. But when you look at the overall total predictive validity of our 4-minute test based on the chat model compared to what people actually observe in the real world in their performance, 82% accuracy, which is unheard of in the social sciences. Absolutely unheard of. So we feel pretty good that our chat model is where you need to be. Now, I don't have an algorithm to share with you today. I don't have that for you, but I do have something else. You see, we know how the chat model fits together, how those individual components build on one another to create someone that's low, medium, or high. And you can use that information today, either internally with your incumbents for training and development, what you should be working on with them in what order, or if you are bringing people back from furlough, or you're ramping up and you're now going to go reopen and you're trying to build out your bench strength, and so you're in a hiring mode. Well, this same set of insights can help you with your screening and selection in an interview format. And you will receive, as part of your attendance here today, you will receive a set of interviewing questions that we developed at Ethos that tie into the chat model. You can't just ask about the chat model, though, in just any order. There's a special order because it builds on the actual hierarchy in which these skills, traits, abilities, and knowledge areas form a ladder. Because some of those chat issues are a foundation that you build on progressively. So you want to interview also in a progressive way. So when you interview someone, you first want to start with general hospitality traits, the hospitableness, the EQ. Once you've now vetted that, you move to adaptability, because adaptability builds on someone's EQ. We learned that from our scaling, our modeling research earlier. Next, you want to see, do they have conscientiousness? You know that these are people that are very outgoing. They give empathy-driven service. These are people that are flexible and nimble in different chaotic situations. Now you want to know, can they also focus on details and go to do what it takes to achieve a result? Once you've now vetted that, you go to the last part, which is but do they also have a foundation, raw IQ, that tells me that they can absorb new information and apply it, and they also have humility to realize that they don't always have the answer. And so they'll seek out help to find that answer in whatever way that's necessary. But that's the last step. So using the questions we will send you, I recommend that when you do a structured behavioral interview, you use the questions that we provide, and you first follow the format of starting with a hospitable trait, moving to adaptability, conscientiousness, and finally trainability. You never tell someone what you're interviewing against. In fact, when you see the questions, they'll make sense to you. You'll know what you're asking about, but the candidate won't, and nor should they. You don't want to publicize the chat model. You don't want to give people any clue as to what you're really after. But if you follow the chat model and you follow our process of behavioral interviewing, we feel very confident based on the psychometric data that you are going to hire people that have the service gene. You're going to have people that have the attitude that you want. And these are the people that have the X factor. It was always necessary before in hospitality, but nowhere is it needed more now than in this COVID era and afterwards. Because you're going to need people that know how to do more with less, that go above and beyond, and that just reflect well on your brand. And with that, I'm happy to open up to questions.
Thank you very much. That was so insightful, Jim. And, you know, I think I speak on behalf of everyone watching. It answers so many questions that, you know, when it comes to hiring people, you know, you look for these really important characteristics, and having an indicator of how to go about that is really very useful. So I also realised as I was watching incidentally that our own deadline for the Sea Trade Cruise Awards has been extended to August 10. So hopefully we will see a number of cruise industry superstars coming our way. So I've got a lot of questions coming through, which is wonderful. So let's see. Is the X factor for leadership roles or line employees or both?
Well, we validated on mostly line level roles because when you think about it, those are the people that are delivering on your brand promise. So those are your ambassadors. So you have to make sure those individuals deliver on a brand promise. So they have to have the X factor. However, it was clear from our interviews that the X factor is not just for people that are front or back of house, delivering on service, delivering on those brand promises. Everyone in the organization has a role in delivering on brand promise. So ideally, everyone should be service driven and action oriented, like the X factor, because everyone is serving somebody else. Everyone has a customer that they're trying to please. So we would argue that the X factor model certainly applies beyond just the entry or line level.
Okay, so what would you recommend for assessing and hiring leaders?
Well, the hint there I'm getting is that somebody wants a recommendation on an assessment, a psychometric assessment. And there are many. In fact, I'm happy to have a conversation with people on the different options that are available and the pros and cons of each. Everyone can see my contact info. I'm happy to have those conversations because it can get a little sensitive. But I would say also incorporate the chat model into your hiring of mid-managers and especially senior level executives. Because if nothing else, those individuals have to model the very behavior you want everyone else to follow. So just like a lighthouse, they have to be what people look at in a prism of decision making. They have to say, oh, this person is doing these kinds of behaviors. I see what they want me to do. I will go ahead and do it. So it helps with coaching and training to have people that model the very behaviors you're trying to reinforce. And those same that everyone will receive about the chat, the structured interviewing questions, can also be used with mid-managers and senior level executives.
Okay, so another question we have is, how does the assessment curb unconscious biases that occur when hiring?
Well, that's what's interesting, and this is where if we lift up on the hood of the psychometrics of our little test, and that's what I'm gonna use as the example here.
Great.
The little game that we have. Remember, we just didn't start with that. We first start with some foundational research to understand whether our ideas are the attitudes and behaviors legitimate, or are the ways that people see the attitudes and behaviors skewed by implicit bias. there are statistics that can tell you whether items are biased. And typically people don't even aware that they're exhibiting these biases. So that is the definition of implicit bias. People just over-endorse an issue or under-endorse an issue because of maybe their age, their gender, their level of employment, or the sector of the industry that they're coming from. So we want to make sure that first, the core foundation of your assessment is unbiased. And then when we developed our little game, the algorithms were actually not looking at a person's overt answer to one of the scenarios. It's very tempting to think that, oh, all the test is doing, all that little game that Dr. Jim mentions is doing is every time someone chooses a social situation over a problem-solving situation, well, that tells me they're more extroverted than analytical. No, not at all. What the algorithm was finding were little hidden indicators that only people that tended to be low, medium, or high tended to exhibit. So if you had a certain level of the X factor, you also had certain very specific hidden indicators. That is what our little game is picking up on, not just the obvious patterns that people might think. So that's a way that we can help protect against adverse impact and show that an assessment is not biased, because we're not scoring it according to what a person just sees and what they're implicitly replying to. We're going after very subtle but cumulative behaviors that add up, that give us the sense or that dictate, oh, this person has hidden indicators that we only see with low, only with medium, or only with high. And that's how we're able to get that level of predictive accuracy.
Fantastic. Now, what advice on that note can you give to people who strive to have the X factor and these characteristics that you've spoken about today?
No, that's a good question. I appreciate it, because most of the time people think of assessments just for screening and selection. And if you use an assessment that goes beyond personality theory, goes beyond personality traits, well, then you can apply it with coaching and development. You can't do that with personality traits. Okay, you can't coach me out of having brown eyes. Okay, personality also is hardwired in your DNA. What I talked about with the chat model, these are abilities, these are skill sets. You can impact these with coaching and training. So by knowing what goes into making someone a service superstar, now you can hone, you can tailor your training and coaching programs, whether that's either for an individual or for an entire group of, let's say, high potentials. By knowing that you need to focus on their conscientiousness, their emotional intelligence, their adaptability, and their trainability. Anything beyond that is icing on the cake, but you got to hit those 4 issues if you want someone that's going to be a service superstar.
Wonderful. Now I've got another question, which is, this individual says that they understand that personality does not equal talent, although isn't a company culture largely based upon the personality traits or values of top leaders?
A great question, and I would say that the assumption that a company culture is like a company personality is only half right. You get that from brand marketing theory, where we know that products and services have human-like characteristics. They have personality traits, and people tend to align themselves with products or services that they like the personality. They oftentimes feel that they have the same personality traits as that product or that service. That's where you get brand loyalty from. Okay, just like a romantic relationship, you have compatibility on what really matters because you have a similar way of thinking or doing. However, I would argue that company culture goes well beyond just values. Values are fine as long as they're lived. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call right now know that maybe they're the company that they've been with before had values on the wall, but they never lived them in practice. Okay, so it's not enough to have values. You have to act on those values. So now we're talking about actions and behaviors, not personality traits. So the working dynamics of a company is just as, if not more important than the values, because the real values of the organization are revealed, not with words on a wall, but in how business actually gets done. And so we're looking at action, behavior-oriented traits and characteristics. So that's why we go with the chat model. And so while you certainly want to make sure someone is compatible with the value set of an organization, they also have to be compatible with the way business gets done. And that means working relationships and the actual functional dynamics.
Great. Now, we've got a question which is relating to COVID-19, which is no surprise, really. It's everywhere at the moment, you know, in terms of subject matter and discussion. So the question that I'll put to you, Jim, is, do you think that the lockdown will have a positive impact on hiring with selectivity in mind, as fewer ships sailing means fewer positions, but more people looking for work than ever? So maybe lines can be more selective. What's your view on that?
Yes. In principle, I think you're seeing more people on the job market, or at least they're willing to hear about an opportunity. We even see that in executive search. So just because someone might still have a job doesn't mean that they're happy in that job, given the way that maybe the business has changed. Maybe they were never happy in that job. So yes, I would say there's probably more people theoretically in the pipeline. However, that also means there's greater pressure, there's greater competition, and that pressure to perform is not just on a company trying to hire quickly, but also on the candidates. Now they're more motivated than ever to try to tell you what they think you want to hear, to try to inflate their credentials, to try to tell tall stories. And sometimes people don't even do these things on purpose. I'm not trying to say that people go into job seeking with a deceitful mentality. There's certainly some people that do, but I think some people just out of the natural pressure of competition try to put their best foot forward. We all do this in all aspects of our life. Well, the job search setting is no different. So I think that it's going to be, not only do you have more people to get through, you're also going to have to try to be not just more selective, but more accurate. Take more time with due diligence to uncover the truth about a person rather than the bill of goods they're trying to sell, the persona that they're trying to give you.
Thank you, Jim. So I think we've only got time for one more question, but to everybody watching, you know, we will get a fact sheet across to you, so please bear with us. So we've had a lot of questions around personality, and I'd like to ask you, therefore, we've heard personality isn't a good indicator of performance. So I think that's going back to the speed versus accuracy and suitability for the role perspective. So can hiring somebody, however, based on personality ever be excused, or would you advise against this absolutely?
I don't like to make hard and fast statements. I'm not a dogmatic person, so I'm not going to say that personality should never be used or that it plays absolutely no role. That would be silly to say that. Okay, well, of course, we bring a little bit of ourselves into every situation, of course. However, my point was the way that a person performs, their workplace performance overall, how well they do, is less on personality traits and more on skill sets, attitudes, and knowledge areas. You can't change personality, but you can impact these other things. So I'm not going to try to tell anyone, drop your personality test. If you use it and you like it and you think you have value from it, hopefully you have some evidence for that value, but if you have some value, great. I would only say build on that foundation by adding the chat model, because if you're only vetting by personality theory, you're missing the most important parts, and especially the most important parts of what makes someone a service superstar in today's environment.
Wonderful. That's all we've got time for, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Dr. Jim. Thank you to everyone for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this Sea Trade Cruise Talks. If you'd like to see more of our webinars, or you haven't already seen them, please visit www.seatrade-cruise.com or follow us on social media. So take care, everyone. We'll be back soon.